Charlie Kaufman is a filmmaker, well known for writing iconic films like Being John Malkovich, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and Human Nature, the greatest film of 2001. It's quite hard to narrow down what he's all about, but I like to think of his films as mainly about the way that we relate the world to ourselves. They can often portray the surrealism of everyday life and the anxiety of being an individual navigating so much. Complex things such as identity, art, human nature, the self, love, memory, loss, you get the idea. Take a look at Floor 7.5 from Being John Malkovich, a microcosm of the cramped, soul-destroying life of entry-level office work, created even more alien by the quirky set design and confusing characters.
Damn fine woman, Flores. I don't know how she puts up with this speech impediment of mine.
You don't have a speech impediment, Dr. Lester.
Flattery will get you everywhere, my boy.
But many of the quirks of this world are treated as mundane occurrences. For instance, when a portal into the head of John Malkovich is discovered, you have it treated quite casually by some of the film's characters.
Do you see what a metaphysical can of worms this portal is? I don't see how I could go on living my life the way I've lived it before.
Someone parenting an orphan chimp isn't regarded as an oddity as much as it just blends into a world of casual unreality. If film is to be believed as a strongly subjective medium, then we are seeing the world through the specified emotional lens instilled upon us. By that, we mean that there is no objective reality to a film, only the subjective reality that the film creates for you. With the filmmaker's intentions and all of the tools in their toolbox, the audience can enter the head of anyone. This is a story told from one
perspective.
In 2008, Charlie Kaufman released his directorial debut, Synecdoche, New York, yet another film he wrote the screenplay for. At various points in the film, the main character appears in cartoons, ones which malevolently judge him for his choices and attitudes. Now, it isn't like those cartoons would actually be there in Caden Cotard's quote-unquote reality, though the way it appears in the scene makes it vague as to what's happening outside of Caden's own head. That is the subjective reality of this film. In general, Synecdoche is a film that repeatedly pummels the viewer with its ideas about the cruelty of life, where the world itself is cursing you to an inevitable and horrible fate. Charlie Kaufman spoke on this in a 2008 interview with Ain't It Cool News, saying,
Spike and I originally were approached by Sony to do a horror movie, and we talked about ideas, and we wanted to do something that sort of wasn't attached to the genre notion of horror. And so we were talking about things that are scary in the real world and in our lives, and anxieties and the sort of notion of being in a kind of a dream, being in that dream state. And so we talked about mortality and illness and relationships and regret and loneliness and all that sort of stuff. And that was kind of the palette.
I will be dying, and so will you, and so will everyone here. And that's what I want to explore. We're all hurtling towards death.
No matter what we use to distract ourselves or pass the time, these are universal challenges that everyone will face, no matter their own realities. What you are forced to feel, whether you like it or not, is a sense of empathy for Philip Seymour Hoffman's character. Not only is he suffering, but we are suffering right there alongside him. Film is probably the closest anyone will ever get to being in the mind of someone else, and Kaufman understands this. Furthermore, these films, intentionally or not, emulate the neurodivergent experience, an experience that Orphea and I know firsthand by being on the spectrum. But what does it mean to be neurodivergent?
That's a very good question. I don't know.
Neurodivergent, as the Cleveland Clinic explains,
isn't a medical term. Instead, it's a way to describe people using words other than normal and abnormal. That's important because there's no single definition of normal for how the human brain works. The word for people who aren't neurodivergent is neurotypical. That means their strengths and challenges aren't affected by any kind of difference that changes how their brain works.
in essence, the term is used as a way to describe those who may not fit the typical mold society has set for them. This can often lead to an abstract sense of not fitting in, or even a feeling of dysphoria in one's own life.
Oh, okay. Now what does it mean to be autistic?
As Alexander Avila put in his fantastic video, TikTok Gave Me Autism, The Politics of Self-Diagnosis,
we kind of don't know what autism is. There isn't one thing all autistic people have in common. There isn't any one brain marker or one gene or one experience. Autism is a collection of behaviors that institutions decide to label disordered.
While a good deal of autistic individuals don't self-identify as being disabled, they have the concept of disability projected onto them. This is a dichotomy of insiders and outsiders, haves and have-nots, allistic people and autistic people. When deemed neurodivergent, you are othered. Both Kaufman's protagonists and stories echo this sense of otherness. Being on the outskirts of society is sort of a given when you take a look at who it is he's making us sympathize with. Even when Kaufman uses himself as the self-insert character in adaptation, he is shown to be an outsider to Hollywood, unable to understand how to fit into the script that people such as his brother do. However, I'd be remiss if I didn't make something clear. These interpretations of neurodivergence are based on the lived experience of only two neurodivergent women. If you too are neurodivergent and don't feel like your experiences are represented through these films, that's totally cool. The transformative nature of art is what allows these conversations to happen at all, and the neurodivergent and autistic spectrums make it impossible to objectively measure the accuracy of this work by any metric. But art is interpretive, which basically means that these films are mine now, and I can call them whatever I want, and you can't stop me!
Anyways, this takes us to... I'm thinking of ending things. When compared to Synecdoche, New York, this is more of a typical horror film. Taking a look at the book that it's based on, or even the trailer, will clue you into that. But as is always the case with Kaufman, there's more going on under the surface. There's so much going on here that I've even referred to it as a 2-for-1 special of a film, with it morphing through whatever lens you view it through. If you can't already tell, it's basically impossible to discuss this film without spoiling it to heck and back. Savoring all of those delicious details means a lot to us. So we're working on a follow-up video that gives away what's really going on behind this. To keep it brief, I'm thinking of Ending Things as a film about a young woman going to visit the parents of her boyfriend Jake. Things aren't going well between them, but don't worry, they're about to get much worse! It becomes increasingly obvious that nothing is as it seems as the film contorts into an absolute beast of uncertainty, with the only guarantee being the certain doom awaiting you. Parallel to that, the film is also a character study, a dark drama focused on analyzing the pathology of Jake and his relationship to the world. Now this is where I finally get to my thesis.
Took you long enough, Doc.
Yeah. Anyway, Jake is autistic, or at least neurodivergent. We eventually learn that Jake is a very guarded person. He struggles with people, but especially with keeping many people in his life at all. One of his fatal flaws is how much he wishes to control everything around him, which includes the people in his life and the conversations they engage in. His mother says about him,
Jake can be controlling. You can't allow him to control you. I think it's the other side of his type of personality, this diligence thing. He needs to control everything. There are so many things that make him nervous. He keeps closing off more and more of the world. It's a problem. And the few people he does have left in his life need to follow all sorts of rules. It really is a problem.
This particular excerpt identifies this cycle that he finds himself in, shutting off the things that initiate feelings of nervousness, only to undercut that by totally changing it in any way he can. We can see that expressed in the car ride back from Jake's parents, where he promptly changes topics after beginning to mentally spiral. He and his girlfriend have a particularly rough argument about one of Jake's favorite films, A Woman Under the Influence. Jake begins to feel hurt by the fact that someone has just torn apart a film that he sees great value in. It's oddly relatable, especially as someone with ASD, to feel wounded when you see your special interest being ripped to shreds. This criticism stirs a feeling in Jake that the film has no inherent value in what it's saying, and by extension, there is no inherent value to why he feels a kinship with it. Jesse Plemons communicates feelings of despair through his incredible performance of Jake, as he lachrymosely goes on about the hopelessness of life.
No, that it's going to get better, that it's never too late, that God has a plan for you, that age is just a number, that it's always darkest before the dawn, that every cloud has a fucking silver lining.
Things proceed to get worse and worse, until he randomly interjects,
"Hey, do you want something sweet?"
It's a desperate attempt to recover a situation that he noticed has hit a brick wall. Throughout the film, Jake's frustrated girlfriend attempts to get her own moments of expressing negative feelings, all of which get intercepted by Jake pulling into whatever destination he needs to get to.
Like an oozing wound.
Jake.
Here! Ta-da!
Jake's place within the narrative serves the purpose of showing how much some neurodivergent folks can't handle change, and the way these scenes end, it exemplifies a sort of willingness to control that which cannot be controlled.
Speaking of those scenes of the two of them in the car, they're some of my favourite of the whole film. Instead of the energy being warm and lively, it becomes cold and suffocating. The fact that these characters have poor chemistry is made so much worse by the fact that they are locked within the confines of a stuffy car trip and an even stuffier aspect ratio. It very much reminds me of David Lynch's Inland Empire, the best film ever made ever, where for minutes on end you become uncomfortably close to a visitor played by Grace Zabriskie in the main character's home. While Laura Dern's character is framed from medium close-ups, you're brought close enough to Zabriskie that you can make out every wrinkle of her face. These close-ups force you into enduring an unsettling aura that permeates every passing moment. Here, the mise-en-scène literally traps you in this conversation. The sequence only relents after Dern too winds up inside the same sort of framing. It's hard to really show just how long this conversation goes on for and how it alludes to many themes in the film. But the point is that not only are you being forced into paying attention to this extremely weird conversation, but it acts as a map to navigating the rest of this extremely confusing labyrinth of ideas.
Forgetfulness. It happens to us all. And me? Why, I'm the worst one. Oh, where was I?
The rest was history. That was like 6 weeks ago. God, feels longer. Feels like forever in a way. I can't even remember how long ago it is.
I'm Thinking of Ending Things takes us a step further, with the car rides lasting 20 minutes or longer and taking place inside a cramped vehicle as opposed to a lavish mansion. One of the many horrors of this film is being forced to engage in conversation when all you want to do is stew in the silence and stare out the window. Cinematographer Łukasz Żal spices up this seemingly dull set of sequences with some incredible framing of the two young lovers. However, you rarely get a moment of stillness, as all the dead air is filled up with either the young woman's thoughts or the cringe-inducing conversation. When you're in a car with someone, there's no exiting the social situation, no other room to go to, no form of escape. These types of conversations are difficult, as they feel like the more you talk, you inevitably reveal more of the person that you are. Even with the moments of light-hearted brevity, there is an underplayed defensiveness infecting every moment. I'd go so far as to say it's an autistic trait to be scared of this. Personally, I've had days where walking into any conversation has been a terrifying experience, and I've gotten overly defensive as a result.
The most overt piece of evidence of Jake's autism would be his characteristic of diligence, and the pin he won for it.
He was even awarded a diligence pin at school, you remember?
Are you still working on that?
Diligence. 8. Can you believe that? It was quite a thing. His father and I never got awarded any such pin at 8.
You remember how excited you were about that dinner?
He wore it to school.
I didn't.
He did. Every day. You did.
No, I was disappointed. I wanted the acumen pin. Diligence isn't also ran. You there, you work very hard. You're not very bright, but we're impressed that you tried anyway.
Here's where that previously mentioned dichotomy of neurotypical and neurodivergent people rears its head. The man Jake wishes he was is represented by the acumen pin, which he wasn't awarded, while the diligence pin becomes representative of what he is in actuality. Jake feels undermined by the world around him and sees that he's been awarded a mere consolation prize. His place in the world is unfortunately defined by him being on the spectrum, which it seems that he fails to recognize. It reads to me that Jake aspires to make something of himself, something that will make him feel seen by the world.
Sometimes it feels like no one sees the good things you do.
An obstacle in Jake's way could be the many disparate interests he has, be it physics or the works of poets like William Wordsworth, novelists like Anna Kavan, or even playwrights like Oklahoma's Rogers and Hammerstein. Some of these can even be spotted strewn about this shot of Jake's old bedroom.
Now, it isn't like that's a problem in of itself, having many special interests at once, but it can prove an issue when you have to make a career out of it. Instead, his one discipline or study is left intentionally vague, even when you take into account his many passions. This, of course, is a characteristic of some people that have been labelled autistic, but so is hyperfixating on your favourite stuff no matter what. Throughout the film, you see Jake bring up these pieces of media through the most try-hard digressions humanly possible.
His poem Ode, Intimations of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood.
Jesus, that's the title? Sounds like an entire poem.
Jessie Buckley as Jake's girlfriend conveys a palpable sense of disdain every time Jake does this, which is a prime fear for autistic folks. The fear of not having someone pay attention to you when you open up to them about what is close to you. This can be gleaned from some of the shot composition, as he fades into the background, just like he may do in the world outside of the storytelling. Hell, Jake isn't even supposed to be the main character of this story. His girlfriend is.
Which, oh my god, this ties right back into how Kaufman uses the internal world to create an external world for the film to explore. Jake is but a secondary character, literally and metaphorically. But he's only in this position because of his abnormality. Ian Reid's novel makes note of this even more directly, as Reid pointedly implements the word normal as a means of drawing a line in the sand between people like Jake and, well, everyone else. But why does any of this even matter? Why should we care if a fictional man is autistic or schizophrenic or what have you? Well, with the sort of story this film is telling, it can act as a sort of cautionary tale. One about walling yourself off from parts of the world that scare you. To become scared to live your life because living itself is scary and dangerous. If we return to that conversation Jake has with his mom, it points towards the core of Jake's inner turmoil. His high-strung demeanor throughout the film can be seen as a reflection of his frustration. Frustration over so much, be it the inability to steer a conversation how you please, control the ways that those around you perceive you, or the ways that your family may embarrass you. It's the terror of uncertainty, and the truth that you can't control everything. And it is the very horror we see on display.
What control do any of us really have? Like Jake, it's so much easier to repress those feelings, to retreat into our old childhood memories, comforts and platitudes, to tinge it in some way so that every cloud does have a silver lining. But we owe it to ourselves to take those risks, to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations so that we may grow, Being neurodivergent can be very scary in a world as antagonistic as ours, but we don't have to be afraid of human connection, because as messy and unsure as we are, everyone is dealing with a similar set of ordeals. As Father John Misty once put it,
I hate to say it, but each other's all we've got.
An unavoidable fact is that we live in a world built for the neurotypical, so it's important to find stories about those who aren't in that rigid box, even when they are few and far between. Our livelihood is threatened in overt and subtle ways all the time, but we're still here kicking. This is not only where community comes in, but art as well. Art is capable of reaching the hearts of billions and delivering messages that some would never subject themselves to willingly. It calls to attention what can't go unsaid, but often does. It hits those audience members willing to give a piece of media a chance and truly listen. I'm thinking of Ending Things is a film that we feel should really be listened to.
Before we end things, it must be remarked that Kaufman's filmography is by no means the end-all be-all of neurodivergent representation, as every film we have covered so far has come from the minds of white dudes writing stories about white dudes. There are large swaths of neurodivergent struggles not on display. We highly encourage those who have connected with this story to not only seek out more stories of neurodivergence, but especially those portrayed by a diverse set of neurodivergent cast and crew. Still, as a trans woman on the spectrum, I see so much of myself and my neurodivergency in Jake. I see my place in the world, my desire to be seen, and my obsessions all illustrated so perfectly. And I am all the happier for it.
Jake, whether he is intended to be neurodivergent or not, has given so many people the opportunity to see themselves represented on the screen. His story is a true story, echoed by the experiences of millions. Our world likes to forget that only a few decades ago people like us got shoved into asylums, and we are only now beginning to be heard by the wider populace. Stories spread the word of this hurt and create empathy out of thin air. We are more than just ourselves. We become our actions, what we believe in, who we spend our time with, and how that affects others, and most importantly, what we create. Art is a beautiful thing that creates meaning in our hearts, which then reverberates through us into the world to the point that we are stronger through that creation. We are our art as much as our art is us.
Now who are you?
The floor creaks, the door squeaks. There's a field mouse nibbling on a broom, and I sit by myself like a cobweb on a shelf, by myself in a lonely room. But when there's a moon in my window and it slants down a beam across my bed, then the shadow of a tree starts dancing on the wall, and a dream starts dancing in my head, and all the things that I wish for turn out like I want them to be, and I'm better than that smart alley cowhand who thinks he's better than me, and the girl that I want ain't afraid of my arms,